Buffalo Jim owned two businesses, an auto shop and a pro wrestling school. These businesses were sandwiched on either side of the most iconic strip club in all of Las Vegas, the Crazy Horse 2. The club's owner, Rick, who allegedly might have had ties to the mob, knew he could make a lot more money by expanding the club into the rest of the building. But he knew he needed Buffalo Jim and his businesses to move out in order to do that, and Jim wouldn't leave. According to Jim at the time and people who I spoke with who were around at the time, Rick did everything he could to strong-arm Jim out.
There's been a lot of problems here since the day the Crazy Horse 2 moved in.
We're going to scare you, you're going to leave. And then within days, the cars that were waiting for service got their tires slashed and the paint was keyed and all kinds of horrible things happened.
He would answer the phone, auto and marine, and you would hear someone on the other end saying, you know, you messed with the wrong people. Your day is coming. Time is limited. I remember hearing that.
You heard those yourself?
Those words, those exact words.
Wow.
Yeah, I was scared.
On the morning of April 5th, 2008, Jim receives a letter warning him that he is in danger. That night, Jim is found dead in a Motel 6. He had cocaine on his beard and chest, and there were no obvious signs of foul play in the room. To really understand Jim's death, there's a lot of context that we need to understand. Las Vegas is one of the most unique cities in the world. It was literally created by the mob. But most people believe that by the late 90s and definitely in the early 2000s when Jim died, the mob had lost its power and were gone. They weren't a serious force in Vegas anymore. Some people think Jim simply died of an accidental overdose that day, that his family won't accept that fact, so they're blaming the non-existent mob for his death.
But I was always also very concerned about my dad because like he was fighting a mob. But again, that 10% doubt became 8, 6, 4, 2, no percent doubt anymore. Yeah. My dad was murdered.
And the media won't accept that fact because a mob hit makes for a much more entertaining story.
Steve Barrier is someone you have interviewed many times.
Yes, indeed, Sue. He is a well-known character to anyone who watched all of the stories we did on the crime-infested Crazy Horse 2 nightclub.
Going in, I wasn't sure what the truth was. The fact that Jim died the day he got a warning letter led me to believe that this had to be a murder carried out at the order of mob-connected Rick Rizzolo. But then I found something that no one else had found yet, that there might be more to this letter than meets the eye.
You know something, I've never seen these compared, and so this is news to me, and I'm a little shocked.
Yeah. Was Jim's death a simple accidental overdose, or was Jim's death the result of an ongoing battle with the still present and powerful mob that had simply gotten better at hiding in the shadows?
Nobody quite ever figured out what was going on, and now, of course, I can talk about both Buffalo and I were confidential informants for the FBI.
Like most people, I really see the value in eating healthy. It helps me be my best throughout the day, but it's one of those things that's just so much easier said than done. I want to thank Hungry Root for sponsoring this video. Instead of planning out all the ingredients needed to cook for the week and going to the grocery store to hunt them all down, Hungry Root sends fresh custom orders right to my door. The recipes are incredibly easy to cook, even for someone like me, who, outside of cheap frozen pizzas, used to view cooking like it was a foreign language. With Hungry Root, I feel confident in the kitchen. Here's how it works. Hop on their website and take a short quiz. Based on the results, Hungry Root will build out a cart tailored to you specifically with fresh food that will not only meet your health goals, but be tasty too. When your cart arrives, you can view all your easy to cook recipes online. Instead of cheap frozen pizza, I'm eating chicken hummus pitas, Alfredo seared scallops, and still get my pizza fix with a pepperoni white pizza on naan. Hungry Root is the easiest way to stay healthy and even offers pre-packaged and prepared meals for an even faster way to stay on top of your health goals. Hungry Root can also be your one-stop shop as they also have smoothies and protein shakes, snacks, and more. Their almond chickpea cookie dough is one of my absolute favorites. The first 100 people to use my code EricAllen40 will get 40% off their first grocery order with Hungry Root. Use the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen and use code EricAllen40 to get 40% off. Thank you, Hungry Root, for making this episode possible. Back to the video. I'm going to be talking about some pretty wealthy and powerful people in this video. I do not want to get sued, so even if there's a ton of evidence to support something, you're still going to hear me say allegedly many times in this video. Buffalo Jim's business neighbor, Rick Rizzolo, was allegedly very well connected to the mob. We're going to go over some of those connections later, but first we have some questions to answer. When and why did the mob take over Las Vegas? Many people think the mob pretty much lost its power back in the 80s or 90s. Did they still have influence into the 2000s? The answer may surprise you. I sat down with Jeff, a historian at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, to find out more.
So, organized crime really got started in America in the 1800s when you had Irish immigrants coming to the United States. Then you see further immigration in the latter part of the 1800s with Italians coming here, Sicilians coming here. And so all of these groups are coming to America, to a country that doesn't really embrace them. And so they're growing up in ghettos, they're living on the streets, surviving, and they form organized crime groups. And you see these groups really developing into a wide array of criminal rackets in the early 1900s. And then everything breaks open in a big way with Prohibition. Prohibition opens the door for hoodlums to turn into millionaires, right? Because instead of, the small-time stuff they were involved in, now they control the booze in America. The mob mystique really comes out of the fact that these guys were like Robin Hood characters. They were fulfilling a need, right?
Yeah, people wanted to drink.
People wanted to drink, and the whole notion that we were banning it nationally did not sit well in many parts of the country. So the mob grew dramatically during the 1920s and early 1930s and expanded into other areas as well. Prohibition ends in 1933. The mob needs new criminal lines to exploit. A big one of those is gambling. In the 1940s, they take an interest in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas has legalized gambling. The mob has been seeing increasing pressure in other parts of the country. They have these illegal gambling operations. The idea of being able to operate legally in southern Nevada is very appealing. And so you see mob groups starting to arrive in Las Vegas in the 40s.
What is it about gambling that's so appealing to the mob?
I think the number one appeal of gambling for the mob is it was a cash business. This was a way you could money launder, right? You could hide your money. There was a lot of very loose accounting standards when it came to gambling.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the mob had power in Vegas without it being so blatant to everyone else or the authorities?
I mean, one of the things that's important to understand about the mob is the transformation of the mob during Prohibition from thugs, right, to a much more sophisticated mindset, hobnobbing with politicians, hanging out in exclusive hotels and clubs alongside political leaders, business leaders. They were treated, in somewhat equally. So I think when you look at how the public, at least in Las Vegas, viewed the mob, you have to look at it in different eras, right? So I think when you're looking at the 1950s and 60s, there was a general tolerance because there was an acceptance that, these organized crime groups were here, but they were also doing a really good thing. They were helping to build the casino industry here, helping to build the economy here. It was a very safe place to live. You could raise kids here. The actual perception and reality were very different. So Las Vegas was sort of in the golden age at that time. Now, in the 1970s, the attitude started to change. So we started to get the feeling that Las Vegas was big. It was capable of operating without the mob. It had a future. There was a very important turning point in 1969 with the passage in the Nevada legislature of the Corporate Gaming Act. And the Corporate Gaming Act opened the door for corporations to invest in Las Vegas. And frankly, Wall Street had a lot more money than the mob ever had. Now, the mob did not just walk out and give up. I mean, it went kicking and screaming. You saw the FBI arrive in the late 70s in a much bigger way. Around that same time, you had the passage of the RICO Act at the federal level. And RICO allowed for mass prosecution of organized crime figures in a way that could not have been done previous. They were pretty much out of business by the late 1980s here. The casinos themselves pretty much went corporate, pretty much went with private ownership.
So by the late 80s, the heyday of the mob in Vegas was over. But like Jeff said, they were not gone. They still had other ways of making money in Vegas.
They were involved in extortion rackets and bookmaking and loan sharking and things that are happening on a small-time basis. they were looking for angles, right? And just like any kind of criminal enterprise, they had different kinds of front businesses, whether they were auto repair shops or bars or what have you, or strip clubs. And this became kind of the way traditional organized crime kept its hand in Las Vegas.
This is where Buffalo Jim's story intersects head-on with the mob. I think there's some important context to understand here. When Jeff says after the late 80s the mob was involved in more small-time stuff, he's absolutely right, but it's a huge relative term. In the mob's Vegas heyday, they had control of most of the casinos, and a single casino could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars per year. By the 90s, the most profitable enterprise they had was strip clubs, and there was far less of those in Vegas than casinos. The most iconic strip club in all of Vegas, though, was the Crazy Horse 2, sandwiched right between Jim's auto shop and wrestling school in the same building. In 2006, the Crazy Horse 2 reported $57 million in revenue. While this is considered small time relative to the heyday of the mob, it's enough to motivate any criminal organization to protect it at all costs. We'll talk more about the Crazy Horse 2 in a moment. First, let's get to know another Vegas icon, Buffalo Jim.
He was bigger than life. He was a big show-off. He was a wrestler.
This is Steve Miller. He's been quite a few things in Vegas over the years. He was a Las Vegas city councilman, reporter, FBI informant, and a friend of Buffalo Jim's, to name a few.
Well, Vegas is, Elvis and, Liberace and Buffalo Jim. He became the most, when the Review Journal voted him the most colorful character here, he beat our own mob mayor, Oscar Goodman, who wasn't too thrilled about it all. And then he had his own Buffalo Wrestling Federation commercials, which were horrible.
Yeah.
And
they're so quintessential, like 80s and 90s. Like when I've watched them, they're so fun.
I'm Buffalo Jim with the Buffalo Wrestling Federation. We're going to be at Mahoney's Silver Nugget Casino.
Hey, Buffalo, man, I got to thank you, man. The last time that I was on Buffalo's show, I was on the cover of the Raw magazine, and that's a big deal. Now I got Stone Cold calling me. I got The Rock. I got Kane. Big Show, he's a big fan of yours, man, and they all want to be on your show, so we're going to hook it up, man. You never know what's going to happen.
You never know who's going to be there.
And the first thing that touched me when I learned about him, I was assigned to go and work with him as a reporter, actually. But when I first saw him, he was like the most selfless guy I knew. He'd give somebody the shirt off his back. If they couldn't afford to pay for repairs on the car, it was gonna be okay. Don't come, if you got a couple of bucks, I'll take it. If not, drive safe. He was just a good guy.
And Buffalo Jim wasn't just an iconic Vegas figure. He was also a father to 4 girls. Here's his daughter, Jennifer.
Again, a larger-than-life personality. When you walked in a room, you stood up. I never wanted to disappoint my father. He always cared about us. He wanted us to have a great education. He always mentioned that he didn't graduate high school or go to college, and that was really important for his daughters to do. So every day he would come home. He worked long hours. He would leave at 6 a.m. and not come home till 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, providing for our family, working at the auto repair shop. And he would come home and he would ask me, what did I do, at school today? And how much homework did I have? And what are my grades? He always wanted to make sure that I got the support I needed. So again, a father that really cared. I was a very quiet child growing up, very shy. And my dad one day said, I know what can change that. You're gonna run for student council. He was like, you're gonna run, you're gonna get in front of people, you're gonna start communicating more with people, you're not gonna be shy anymore. That's gonna help you not be shy. And he put my posters together, even had a slogan for me. And it was, don't be buffaloed with your vote, vote for the best, to Jennifer Buffalo Barrier. And I was embarrassed. I'm like, my middle name is not Buffalo. And he had his pictures with him with wrestlers on my poster board. It was so funny. Looking back, I missed that. Yeah. But I was embarrassed at the time. I won that election. And then the next year, vice president, and then I became president. Every election he ran for me, I won. And he really got me out of my shell. And otherwise, I'd probably be still very shy. Yeah. He's just a great father. He was able to identify traits in us where we lacked in certain areas. He would try helping us to get out of that situation to become better.
Jim owned a beautiful home on the outskirts of Las Vegas, overlooking the entire city. Jim was very successful, but his success wasn't handed to him. He only had a middle school level education. He grew up in Ohio with a family who didn't have much. His mom made a business trip to Vegas when Jim was 9, and he got to go with her.
So he went out to Vegas with his mom, and he was amazed by the glamour. The glitz and glamour is what he told me. And I thought, glitz and glamour? He doesn't look like he's glitz and glamour to me. But anyway, he just loved the environment. Yeah. He said he loves the people. It's kind of like a country town. Like it's the wild, wild west. He said he would see people in cowboy hats and spurs on their boots. Yeah. He loved it. So he had told his mom that when he's older, he's moving to Las Vegas. And sure enough, after he was 18 years old, he made his way out west. Because remember, he was working since he was 12 years old, so he started saving money. By the time he was 18, he was able to buy a van. And he would just go from gas station to gas station in different states, making his way from Cleveland, Ohio to Las Vegas. And he would work along the way so that he could have enough money to keep the motor running. He eventually made his way to Vegas in 1971. Never left.
Jim began putting his mechanic skills to work as soon as he arrived in Vegas, and it wasn't long until he was able to open up his very own shop. But his passions didn't stop with automotive work.
So my dad met a pro wrestler in Vegas, and they became very good friends. And that wrestler would come to our birthday parties. Like him and my dad were so close. And my dad just started hobnobbing with professional wrestlers and started developing relationships with these people. They liked my dad. Another pro wrestler wanted to start a school, and my dad said, well, let's make that happen. You know, my dad's a big personality in Vegas. There wasn't a pro wrestling school in Las Vegas at the time. So, I mean, the market research shows this would be a great place to have a pro wrestling school. So they agreed with a handshake that my dad would start the school as the brains, the operations behind it, with the name Buffalo Wrestling Federation, and the wrestler would teach the students how to wrestle. He had a TV show every week on cable TV.
I'm here tonight at the Buffalo Jim's Pro Wrestling School, brother.
And that was a really great business for a while.
I think about the wrestling school, and from what I know of your father so far, it also seems like it was probably an outlet for mentorship. You know,
yes.
Your father loved helping people, and so to have this school with all these kids, it was also just another outlet for him to be able to mentor people.
Oh yeah, like I would go to my dad's auto repair shop, and there were like 7, 8 wrestlers sitting in my dad's office just talking to him about life.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. My dad was a big kid at heart anyway. Yeah. So him just connecting with the youth and trying to help them make decisions or create plans for their lives. I think my dad would have been a great motivational speaker even.
Yeah. While Jim's life was going incredibly well in so many areas, there was one major issue. You see, a few years after Jim opened the shop in the strip mall just off of downtown Las Vegas, a neighbor moved into the building.
There's been a lot of problems here since the day the Crazy Horse 2 moved in.
This was the birth of countless issues for Jim, from customers being harassed, to cars being vandalized, to lawsuits and legal battles. Jim found himself at war with his neighboring business, the Crazy Horse 2. To truly understand this war, we need to understand a few things about the Crazy Horse 2.
I just love dancing at the Crazy Horse 2. Come on, join me.
It's 1981 and the owner of the Crazy Horse 2 strip club vanishes. A few months later, his head is found out here in the middle of the desert. The Crazy Horse 2 was started by a man named Tony Albanese and was the successor to his first strip club, the Crazy Horse Saloon. His murder is referenced in the iconic mob movie Casino.
And the bosses were no better. I mean, they complain day and night because things don't run smooth.
Frankie, they found a guy's head in the desert. You know about that?
Yeah, I heard, yeah. I know.
You gotta tell him to take care of things a little better.
Tony was connected to the mob. While his murder case was never solved, I've read that detectives believe he was a casualty in an ongoing mob war between the Chicago Outfit mob and the Bonanno family mob for control over the strip clubs in Vegas. With Tony gone, a father and son, Bart and Rick Rizzolo, purchased the club. We'll get into their ties to the mob later. The son Rick became the majority owner by 1986. The club saw massive success after it was purchased by Rick. High rollers and celebrities like Dennis Rodman, Kid Rock, Pamela Anderson could be seen there. The club was even featured in the movie Ocean's 11.
Say hi to your mom for me.
Say it yourself. She'll be on stage in 5 minutes.
The Crazy Horse 2 wasn't just a strip club in Vegas. It was the strip club in Vegas.
Well, the last year it was open, they declared on their IRS forms 57 million net. And that was on the IRS forms. Now you're talking of a cash cow business. Was that a quarter of what they actually made, a half?
With the wild success of The Crazy Horse 2, Rick Rizzolo became a prominent and powerful figure. But Rick's ownership of the club came with some huge controversies. There were multiple beatings and death at The Crazy Horse 2 over the years. Before we get into those, let's look at Rick Rizzolo and his alleged ties to the mafia. It took me a little while to grasp what it meant to be mafia. You may have heard the term made man. This is a fully initiated member of the mafia. But someone can work for the mafia without being a made man, and oftentimes the mafia doesn't want the figureheads of their big businesses to be made men. They will have a front man who isn't a made man, and then have an enforcer present who is. If you've seen the movie Casino, Robert De Niro is the front man running things for the mafia, but he is not a made man. Joe Pesci is the mob's enforcer and made man for their operation. Anyways, it's speculated that this front man made man setup was the setup at The Crazy Horse 2, with Rick Rizzolo being the front man and a man named Vinnie Faraci being the made man and enforcer for the operation. Faraci was a made man for the Bonanno family, one of the big 5 families of New York, known for being the most brutal mob family of them all. Interesting fact here, famous mob attorney Oscar Goodman played himself in the movie Casino. He had represented the real-life characters that this movie was based off of. He also represented Rick Rizzolo. Anyways, while The Crazy Horse 2 saw massive success, it also saw its fair share of controversy under Rick Rizzolo's ownership. It was back here near these train tracks, right behind The Crazy Horse 2, where Rick Rizzolo was charged with attempted murder for beating a man with a baseball bat. His attorney, Oscar Goodman, got him off on a simple misdemeanor charge. So what kind of rackets was the mob allegedly running out of The Crazy Horse 2? The first is the most obvious. The reason the mob is drawn to strip clubs in the first place is because it's a cash business. They can skim off the top and funnel that money to themselves without authorities becoming aware. This is the concept shown in the movie Casino. The second is through extortion. Here's an excerpt from one of Steve's articles back in the day that explains the extortion aspect really well. Several witnesses told a federal grand jury that while in the Crazy Horse, they consumed 1 or 2 beverages and later woke up to find they had been robbed or that their credit cards were charged thousands of dollars. The witnesses told the grand jury that they were approached by 2 women in the bar, one a Russian, the other an Asian, who had asked to be bought drinks. After consuming a drink, the men said they felt sleepy, and several said they passed out. Several men testified that they woke up in the parking lot and found that their cash was missing, or several days later found bogus charges on their credit cards. And the last alleged way was through drugs. Here's a drug dealer's quote from an affidavit filed in relation to The Crazy Horse 2. Quote, "During the period 1997 to 98, I was a manufacturer of methamphetamine for sale. During that period, I manufactured and sold methamphetamines to dancers at The Crazy Horse 2. I made such sales to dancers named Lucy and Justice. The sales to these 2 dancers were of such quantities and frequencies without serious and immediate health consequences. Accordingly, such sales were clearly for resale." End quote. Additionally, Rick's brother Ralph, who worked at the club, was charged in 2006 with felony trafficking of a controlled substance. Among all of that alleged criminal activity, there were countless instances of violence and even multiple deaths occurring at The Crazy Horse 2. In one instance, a man named Kirk Henry was disputing a bar bill when an altercation with Crazy Horse 2 staff ensued. Kirk Henry became a quadriplegic due to the injuries. When the paramedics arrived, he had a single $1 bill in his wallet. He was awarded $9 million in a lawsuit against The Crazy Horse 2, but sadly passed away before he was able to collect.
There were 59 arrests in 1 year for beatings and for robberies, and this is all documented.
Throughout all of this, Buffalo Jim was taking pictures and documenting. He even got photos of The Crazy Horse 2 bringing in a shredding truck to shred files when they were under investigation. More on that investigation later. So how did they get away with all of this activity for so long?
The police department was in cahoots. We verified this, the FBI did too, and I wrote stories. Only one police station would respond. It's 8 miles away. The station in the district was only 1 mile away. And so Buffalo started taking pictures of the police officers' interactions with the bouncers. So if somebody called, says, my boyfriend just got beat up and robbed, or I think I've been roofied, or they just towed my car, or the police officers who would respond were always seeming to be the same officers, and Buffalo would then document them going and being entertained on their days off in the VIP room. Same guys, always giving high fives to the same security guys, same bouncers. Hey, man.
And Rick was well connected higher up than just the police department. Here's a list of campaign contributions he or companies he's connected to made to various officials, like his former attorney turned mayor Oscar Goodman, district attorney David Rogers, who returned the contribution after public criticism, city councilmen, and judges. And these are just the official contributions that we know of. There's an interesting situation that leads me to believe he was paying off officials in a much larger capacity. Operation G-Sting could be its very own video, so in an effort to not get too in the weeds, I'll read you a quick Wikipedia excerpt. Operation G-Sting was an FBI investigation into bribes and unreported campaign contributions taken by Clark County commissioners in Nevada and city council members in San Diego. These bribes were from the same lobbyist, representing 2 sets of strip clubs, and was the result of strip club owners Rick Rizzolo and Mike Gallardi trying to remove local no-touch laws affecting the girls in their clubs.
Well, I have a friend who used to be invited to Rizzlo's parties. And at Rizzlo's home, he would always be fundraising for David Rogers, also Judge Nancy Sayeda, who ended up in the Supreme Court. People who were doing favor after favor after favor were at the house all the time.
For years, Rick knew he could make a lot more money by taking over the rest of the strip mall and expanding the Crazy Horse 2.
He had purchased the Crazy Horse 2 back in the 80s, but hadn't purchased the building or the lot until 2002.
It seems as if Rick thought that if he owned the building, he would be able to force Jim out, but he was wrong.
They want to move me out, and I've got 4 children to feed, and I don't think so.
You see, Jim had signed a long-term lease with the previous owner that was valid for a few more years, even under new ownership. He had an excellent deal on his rent, so he wasn't just going to move out unless it made sense financially.
If he would have dealt with Buffalo and just simply helped him to move down the street, paid him market value for his business plus the close time and the moving, Buffalo was going to go. And between myself and Buffalo's accountant and his lawyer, we came up with a price. It was $1.5 million, which was one night of gambling for Rick. And Buffalo would have been gone, and that extra 6,000 square feet would have been taken over as part of the club, and get rid of the Buffalo Wrestling Federation on the other end. There's another 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. The club could have just expanded like a business supposed to. But you have to consider the person that you're dealing with. Buffalo was very polite in the beginning.
But it seemed as if Rick felt he didn't have to do things the right way.
He said what really turned him off was Rizzolo, according to Buffalo, had put a cigarette out on Buffalo's carpet, and just simply wasn't interested in any negotiation. It was going to be, I'm going to scare you. We're going to scare you, you're going to leave. And then within days, the cars that were waiting for service got their tires slashed, and the paint was keyed, and all kinds of horrible things happened.
In addition to Jim and his customers' vehicles being vandalized, Rick allegedly used his connections to have the city designate an unnecessary fire lane in the parking lot and put up no parking signs in order to decrease available parking for Jim's business. The day they were put up, some of Jim's regular customers accidentally parked in those spots, and 3 tow trucks showed up to take the vehicles. Later that day, Jim took a photo of the same parking spaces being used by Rick's valets. No tow trucks showed up for them. Long story short, eventually a news article was written about the whole thing, and the very next day after, city fire department officials removed the no parking signs. I got this huge stack of paper that Jim had put together from his daughter Jennifer. It details even more complaints and harassments. For instance, here's one about the Crazy Horse 2 allegedly tampering with Jim's sign, then subsequently reporting it to the city as a safety concern. The man hired to repair the sign said, quote, "Prior to performing the work, it was obvious to me that there had been a recent attempt to damage and destabilize the frame supporting the sign." And here's another about the Crazy Horse 2 allegedly tampering with and breaking Jim's AC units on multiple occasions. Here's a quote from the AC company that was hired multiple times to fix it. Quote, "Upon inspection, this was obvious vandalism. We have repaired all lines twice."
It was tough. And so, I mean, I saw a change in my dad around 1996 that my dad was always very like outgoing and fun and like, you know, exciting and stuff. He would come home and he was grumpy, angry, mad, worried about money. Oh my gosh, I just had to buy a new air conditioning unit. That was $4,000. They're just gonna break it tomorrow. And he was so upset about this, but what was he gonna do? He's like, my hands are tied. You have Rick who bought off all these politicians who were giving them seed money for their campaigns. How is my dad gonna be able to prevail from that? He's not going to. So then I asked my dad, why don't you just I asked him to move. And then he got angry and he's like, why would I move, kid? I came from nothing. I'm not letting someone take this away from me. So I understood his sentiment and where he came from, but I was always also very concerned about my dad because he was fighting a mob.
Yeah. Jim ended up filing a lawsuit against Rick.
And they put $1 million into the trust fund for Buffalo to pay off all of the expenses of the cars that had been destroyed.
This lawsuit is pretty important, and we'll get to why later. With all of this stuff going on, Jim still didn't budge. He wasn't going to be bullied out. Rick had to try to find another way.
Then we found, the FBI found the wiretap, and there was a wiretap on all of the phones in Buffalo's office, so Buffalo was advised by the agents to not talk on any landline again and to take his cell phone and go way out on the street, because in those years, it's analog. You could actually pick those up, with a scanner. So Buffalo was not allowed to be on his phone on anything other than just automobile business within 100 feet of the building. The line, and Mike Christ actually went up on the roof with him and took pictures. It was just so crude. Here comes Buffalo's phone line, and here's somebody put a couple of, twist ties on the end of the line and just goes off, and where does the wire go? Right into the office next door at the strip club. I mean, it was yeah.
So Jim was at war with Rick, but he didn't have to fight it alone. Steve and others had his back.
I began to, as a court reporter, attend all court actions that pertain to the Crazy Horse 2 or Buffalo Jim and his lawsuits against his neighbor. And so I was there along with other reporters. We were all taking notes, and the story started to build on a local basis then. I wasn't much of a journalist, I was a commentator, so I'm all on his side, and he knew it. Okay, it's kind of nice, to know that one of those 3 or 4 guys aren't really interested in that side. He's only interested in my side. So.
But soon, Rick would find that he had an even bigger adversary than Buffalo Jim to worry about. Like so many mafia crime stories before, the Crazy Horse 2 operation wasn't going to be taken down by local law enforcement or local officials. It took the FBI's involvement. Rick had no idea, but in addition to playing defense and not letting himself be bullied by Rick, Jim was also playing offense, and he was playing for the FBI.
The feds came in and completely usurped the local police department investigation, which was going backwards, not even forwards. Nobody quite ever figured out what was going on, and now, of course, I can talk about both Buffalo and I were confidential informants for the FBI. And that started in 2002, and it lasted through 2007, the day the place was closed. And the confidentiality part is for 7 years, approximately.
So now you can talk about it. Well past that.
Absolutely. But for the 7 years that we were on contract with the FBI, so it wasn't a matter of just, I can't talk. I mean, I don't think I'd go to jail, but I could get in a lot of trouble. You're not allowed to talk.
Yeah. In 2003, the Crazy Horse 2 was raided by the FBI.
And so I was thrilled when I saw the feds step in. The police were told, butt out. When the feds had their raid, I was told about it because they wanted me to cover it, nobody else. I later found out what the real basis of the raid was. Can't believe this story either when I tell you, but I will. They were there for only one reason, was to plant electronics. It was supposedly on the premise of drugs and guns. That wasn't
That was all the cover.
That was the cover. Inside. Yeah, that was the cover. And they planted so much electronics in there. It's cutting edge. I mean, only the feds would have what they had. That place was wired for the next 5 years.
This was the beginning of the end for Rick Rizzolo and the Crazy Horse 2. Over the next few years, the FBI, with the help of Buffalo Jim and Steve, surveilled and investigated the Crazy Horse 2 and its associates.
So my dad was a credible source to them. Yeah. When my dad said something occurred, it actually occurred. But my dad would send in information to them, and I was told that it was very helpful.
My column was completely vetted by the FBI on a weekly basis, and that I would see things there that I thought were kind of interesting. They had how many places, how many links were there to my personal email address throughout, 10 maybe in each column. I didn't put them there. And all of a sudden, on Google and Bing and all the various search engines, if you type in Crazy Horse 2, here comes my column on the top, the next column, the next column. I mean, I'm taking up pages. So I begun to ask around, you know, and the guys laughed and they said, yeah, we took care of that for you, you're famous. Okay, so I said, what am I supposed to do? I'm getting all these emails, you know, people got beat up, they got this and that. He says, okay, that's what we want you to do. That's why we put you in there. He says, if it sounds legit, you got to call me 24/7. And he says, and you give me the name of the person, give me a little scenario as to what they told you happened and their phone number, and we'll get right back to him. He says, you got to tell them they're going to get a call from a guy named Bobby. He's a federal agent. Well, 13 people in the next couple of years, that's as many as I was credited for, emailed me. And they were the federal witnesses.
Rick and the people who had interest in protecting the Crazy Horse 2 may not have known Jim was working directly with the FBI, but they did know that he was a threat.
I mean, I even heard phone calls of harassment, and you can hear my dad would put his calls on speaker.
Yeah.
He would answer the phone, Auto and Marine, and you would hear someone on the other end saying, you know, you messed with the wrong people. Your time is in, or your day is coming. You messed with the wrong people, your day is coming. Time is limited. I remember hearing that.
You heard those yourself?
Those words, those exact words.
Wow.
Yeah, I was scared. The phone rang again. Same person. Going 10, 9, 8, 7, like doing a countdown. And I'm like, what the heck? My dad would hang up, boom, the phone rang again. Constant, they kept ringing his phone so he wouldn't get business. Scary, very scary.
Things got so bad for Jim's family that they no longer felt safe in Vegas and fled to Seattle.
So when we left him to move to Seattle, we left abruptly without him knowing. And we took a Greyhound bus to Seattle. And I was very sad at that time that we were leaving my dad because like he was gonna have no one. And at the time, Jerica went with us initially and wrote him a letter, and we left his house and never came back. Jerica did eventually, but I saw what he was going through and I was scared. It was sad because I love my dad, and my dad, I'm very close to him, and I was still close to him. Yeah. And he was sad we left, but he also told me he understood why.
The FBI had started their investigation into the Crazy Horse 2 in the 90s. It was 2003 when they raided the club, but it wasn't until 2006 and 2007 that things really started coming to a head and charges against employees were filed. To be honest, it was pretty underwhelming. Here's an excerpt written by the Las Vegas Weekly, who spoke with an FBI agent on the case that sums it up pretty well. Quote, the agent says that the FBI had accumulated enough ironclad evidence to hit 21 employees with RICO charges, which carry a sentence of no less than 20 years. And so they were shocked when the U.S. Attorney's Office announced on June 1st, 2006, that they had negotiated plea deals with 16 employees at the Crazy Horse 2 for nothing more than tax evasion, and one for racketeering. And then they were demoralized when they found out that 14 would never spend a day in prison, and that Rick Rizzolo, who got the worst punishment, would only have to serve 1 year and 1 day behind bars, end quote. While this wasn't the stunning victory that the FBI wanted, it did do quite a bit for Jim. You see, Rick was also forced to sell the club and was ordered to never be involved in the strip club business again.
After years and years of battles, the auto shop owner with an 8th grade education took down one of the most powerful and connected men in all of Las Vegas. It seemed like the war had been won, and in a way it had, but I think Jim knew it wasn't that simple.
Jim knew he had to be careful, and he wasn't the only one who knew that. Jim received a couple interesting letters during this time, warning Jim and telling him he was in danger.
He told me that, these letters would come in, and he was so grateful that they would, because they were clues into what's going on. Like, hey, Rick's getting out of prison, meetings are taking place at various locations, and it listed prominent people in the community. It listed the mayor, it listed a councilman, it listed a judge. And my dad trusted this person that was sending these letters. He didn't know exactly who he was. My dad said that he would like trace these letters, meaning like the details of the letters, and he found it to be true. This guy was telling him the truth. He wanted him to know what was happening.
And so your dad never figured out who this person was.
He believed it was an anonymous police officer that really wanted to help him know what was going on. He was an insider. And he was neat in the letter. It was always typed in capital letters, which is what police officers do when they type out correspondence. It's always in caps. I know this because I know a police officer. Their system in Vegas, that's how they type. And but he found that interesting, but he never exactly knew who it was, but he so appreciated it because he was like, I have insight into what's happening right now.
Rick Rizzolo was released from prison about a month early and placed on house arrest until April 4th, 2008. This was the original date set for his release. The very next day, April 5th, 2008, would be Buffalo Jim's last day alive.
Good evening, everyone. This weekend, outspoken enemy of the mob, Buffalo Jim Barrier, was found dead in a local motel room.
There were no obvious signs of foul play, but tonight Barrier's friends and relatives are voicing their strong suspicions. Steve Krupe is live in our newsroom. Steve, Barrier is someone you have interviewed many times.
Yes, indeed, Sue. He is a well-known character to anyone who watched all of the stories we did on the crime-infested Crazy Horse 2 nightclub. Jim Barrier even sued the former club owner Rick Rizzolo for harassment and was awarded $1 million in a court ruling. And now some are wondering if this harassment has turned fatal.
So what do we know about what happened that day? What was Jim up to? How did he die? And was he murdered, or was this just the craziest coincidence I've ever come across?
It's the day after Rick Rizzolo is released from house arrest, and Jim receives a letter at the auto shop.
It's another one of those warning letters letting Jim know he's in danger and that Rick might be planning on using a woman to get close to him. Here's a few lines. Mr. Barrier, meetings have been taking place at various locations around town by Rick Rizzolo, Bart Rizzolo, Oscar Goodman, Tony Srow, Gary Reese, and some of Rick's goons. Rick was one of the persons driving around your property last week. Be careful. He's up to no good. He's using people to get close to you. He's discussed using a female to get access to your business. Jim immediately faxed this letter to Steve, a few other people, and the FBI.
He had faxed the letter he received to me and to Joshua and to John. Everybody saw the letter. We learned later who the guy, if I told you his name, he'd get killed, who sent that letter. He was right in the inner sanctum of the other side.
In the middle of it all.
He was,
Jim gets off work and heads home, but when he gets there, he gets a phone call. When your father left the house for the last time, what were the circumstances? What did he say and do? Was he acting normal? Was he acting abnormal that day? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I have this information through Jerica because she was with him that day. So she said that she heard him receive a phone call and then also heard him starting to get ready, like, in the bathroom, like he was getting ready to leave, and then had told her that he was going to meet a friend and that he would be back before midnight. And she goes, no, don't go, because she didn't want him to leave, of course. And he says, I promise I will be back. It sounds like to me he was going to help someone, right? Why he was persistent on his approach here to go out of the house that evening to go see someone, to go see a friend. He's saying a friend to her. He said, I'll give you $50 if I'm not back by midnight. And she said, make it 100. And they shook on it. And of course, midnight comes around and he's not at home. That's not typical of him. When he tells you he's going to be home at a certain time, he's home at that time, or he'll call. He never came home that night. So Elise came to the house to pick up Jerica because Jerica was scared to stay in the house all night. It was now 1 o'clock in the morning and our dad's not there. The next day, still nothing. And then eventually, Jerica received a phone call from the coroner's investigator, and she says, I need to speak to someone who's an adult. So then Jerica handed the phone to Elise. Elise being 20 years old, she's considered an adult. Elise answered the phone, and they said, your dad was found dead. He's at the Motel 6. We need you to come here and sign off on the body. And my sister was in disbelief. So they get in the car, and they drive as fast as they can to Motel 6. And they're looking around, and it was just like a van in front and a police car, and that was it. They approach the door, and of course, Jerica's 15, and they know that. They invited her into the room. Our dad is there on a stretcher in a body bag, unzipped, and Jerica was just hugging him, didn't want to let him go. And Elise is looking around the motel, and then she immediately told them this was a setup. It was the Crazy Horse 2 people. Somebody killed my dad.
Based on something I read in the police report, it seems as if very early on, before any investigation was done, it was believed that Jim died of natural causes, not foul play. His death was not ruled a homicide, and while an investigation would happen, it wouldn't be done by homicide detectives. Here's a quote from the police report. This was at the scene when the daughters arrived. Quote, "The daughter stated her dad is Buffalo Jim and that someone must have killed him or he was set up since he was receiving threats and because of the fact that he was the one who helped shut down the Crazy Horse 2. The coroner advised the daughters that it appears James Barrier's death was natural with nothing suspicious in the room." End quote. Here's what the pictures show of the scene. Jim was located in room 105, which is on the first floor at the front of the motel. Jim was lying on his back on the bed with his pants around his ankles. It didn't look like there was a struggle or anything, and housekeeping, who had stopped by a few times that morning, assumed that he was just sleeping. But after checking on him more and him not moving, the hotel called the police. There wasn't much going on in the rest of the room. Motel staff had placed a white sheet over Jim before the police arrived. There was a white powdery substance under Jim's nose, on his eyelashes, and on his shirt that was assumed to be cocaine but never tested. There were 2 plastic cups with water on the nightstand between the beds, showing that there was possibly someone else there at some point. Jim's wallet, a single $1 bill, and Jim's press badge were on the other bed. On the bed Jim was on, between his feet, were Jim's keys, a little boxing glove, a toy car alarm, a garage door opener, the hotel key, and a receipt for the room. The keys also had that white powdery substance on them. On the desk adjacent to the bed was his cell phone, some loose change, and a prescription bottle of a drug called Norvasc. Inside the bottle was no Norvasc but 3 pills of Valium. Other than a hand towel and bar of soap at the sink, everything looked pretty clean and unused. After reviewing the photos, I read a few lines in the police report that had me pretty puzzled. It seems as if the police did quite a bit to the scene before pictures were ever taken. Here's what it says. There was no property anywhere in the room except in Barrier's pockets. The only property that appeared to belong to Barrier that was not inside his pockets was a keyring with a single key on it and 2 keychain ornaments attached. One ornament was a toy car alarm and the other was a red toy boxing glove. This key was lying between Barrier's feet on the bed. Inside his right pants pocket was his wallet with his Nevada driver's license and many credit cards in his name. The wallet also contained $1 bill. In his rear pocket was his cell phone, and in his left was another key ring containing approximately 20 to 30 keys. End quote. So it appears before pictures were taken, the wallet was taken out of his pocket and the $1 bill was taken out of the wallet and placed on the other bed. The phone was taken out of his pocket and placed on the desk, and the larger set of keys were taken out of his pocket and placed between his feet. There's no mention of the press badge, garage door opener, hotel card and receipt, loose change, or pill bottle in this officer's report, so we don't know where those were located when Jim was found, or if they had been moved around by police before pictures were taken. This seems odd to me. You're supposed to photograph a scene before it's ever disturbed, but no photos of the scene before it had been disturbed are included in the police report. Maybe they did take them, but just didn't include those photos when they were sent over, or maybe the scene was disturbed before pictures were ever taken. Jim's car was processed as well. In the car, they found a white powder substance on the front passenger seat, a Passion for Men cologne bottle, and 2 papers, one with handwritten directions, and another that the police report says was titled Inside Info, with quote, typed information to Mr. Barrier, lying on the rear seat. I was never able to find a picture of this paper or find out what it said. I think there's a chance that it's this warning letter that Jim got. Maybe the other side of it says Inside Info. The car in itself has a somewhat mysterious story surrounding it as well. Jim drove a classic Rolls-Royce. It's a car that stands out, especially at a Motel 6. The day that Jim was found dead, his car could not be found.
And then Elise asked the investigator where our dad's vehicle was. And they said they don't know. They started a missing car report, but they don't know where the vehicle is located. They said, are you sure? They said, we detailed the whole surroundings. We don't know where the vehicle is. So then my sisters leave and they drive around the whole property because they wanted to try to find the vehicle. They also went over to Boulder Station Casino to see if the valet had the vehicle. Nothing. Well, then Elise gets a phone call like an hour or two later from a sergeant at Metro saying the car is there, you just didn't see it. Right there in like a prominent spot you can see on Boulder Highway. Anybody could see that. A blind person could see that vehicle there.
Here's a few lines from a report. Quote, Officer Carroll explained the call and then asked if she should list the victim's vehicle as stolen as they could not locate it in the area. Officer Carroll explained that the coroner and CSI were already done and both had felt there was nothing suspicious. Officer Mayoral proceeded to start the stolen vehicle report. On April 6th, at approximately 5:30 p.m., the vehicle was located a short time later in the parking lot of the Motel 6, just east of the office. Officer Mayoral then asked the supervisor if he should finish the stolen vehicle report and then recover the vehicle and tow it. He was told to call the public administrator and ask them what needs to be done. Unknown what public administrator he spoke with, but said he was told to release the vehicle back to the family members, end quote.
It mysteriously appeared. And Mike Christ, my friend, went over there, and when the police refused to do a forensic on the car, because Mike looked in the window, he says there's all kinds of white powder all over the red leather seats in the Rolls Royce. So the police refused to cooperate. So Mike, at his own volition, took the car home and made sure that he sat on newspapers and white, gloves or whatever he's using. He wasn't going to mess with it, but he got it home, put it in his garage, and then we called the police again. We got the police finally to show up.
So not only could they not find the vehicle, but when they did, they didn't process it. They just released it to the family. It wasn't until later at Mike's place that they processed the Rolls Royce. And the fact that the car was missing for a little while makes the handwritten directions that were found in the car potentially a little more interesting.
And if you were to follow these instructions, it would take you to an empty lot. Maybe that's where they were collecting the money after they killed him. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what did the police find out about what happened to Jim that night? Well, they got Jim on security footage checking into the hotel. He paid for a room and said it was for him and another person. The police report says, quote, no one at the motel could give a description of the second person that Barrier paid for to stay inside the room. There was no surveillance video that captured any evidence of that second person either. You see, the security cameras on the outside of the building weren't working, so the cameras in the lobby were the only videos the police had. The police would later say the person that he was with was a woman named Lisa. So who was Lisa, and could she be involved in somehow murdering Jim that night? Well, the police had an interview with her, and this is a story that she told them. Here's some info from the police report where they summarized the interview. They use her last name in the report, and I'm going to redact it and use Lisa instead. Lisa is a longtime friend of James Barrier since the mid-'80s. Lisa stated she has gone out with Barrier on several occasions to drink and do drugs. Lisa stated in the interview that on April 5th, 2008, she had received a call from James Barrier in the earlier evening hours. Barrier had asked her to meet her that night and party. Lisa stated she would go with Barrier on several occasions to either his residence or a motel. They would basically do the same thing each time. She would sit beside him while he would lay on the bed. She would take her blouse off and usually say things Barrier would tell her to say as he was ingesting large amounts of cocaine. The summary doesn't explain this here, but she says that he would pleasure himself. Once in the room, they proceeded to do what they normally did together. Lisa said James grabbed his chest. She asked him if he was all right. She then went to the bathroom and got Barrier a drink. Barrier continued to ingest more cocaine. Lisa said Barrier then began to grind his teeth, look up at the ceiling, and again place his hands on his chest. Lisa again asked Barrier if he was all right. Lisa then got up and stood by the door. At this time, she said Barrier started to shake as if he was having a light seizure. Again, she asked him if he was all right. Barrier called her name, Lisa, and exhaled a breath. Lisa then left the room. Lisa said she didn't know if Barrier died before she left the room or afterward. We'll talk more about Lisa later. The coroner found that Jim had died as a result of dilated cardiomyopathy, which is when the heart chambers enlarge and lose their ability to contract. Essentially, his heart just stopped working. Listed as a significant contributing condition was cocaine intoxication. You see, Jim already had a weak heart and took a medication called Norvasc to help it circulate blood. Now, this could all fit the narrative that he just died from taking too much cocaine, but if someone were to want to kill him and knew he had a sensitive heart, could they use that knowledge in a plan to end his life? Based on what's in the police report, they believed that what they found at the scene and learned from Lisa's story and a few others was enough to not pursue looking into Jim's feud with Rick and the Crazy Horse 2. But in the days and weeks following Jim's death, Steve got some concerning letters.
So, but I was receiving threat letters within a day of Buffalo's passing, and they were mailed, and they had Sinatra stamps. I thought that was kind of interesting, and no return address, but they were just simply saying, picture of a grave and pointing down saying, Buffalo Jim. And then it would say, you're next, Miller. And so I published them, of course, and scanned them and published them, let everybody see them. Of course, went to the FBI, went to the police, and asked them, this looks kind of bad. And they said, well, yeah, but it doesn't say you're next for what? I mean, what's next? I mean, they have to be more specific. Yeah, we're going to kill you. Yeah. It's just you're next. What, to have lunch with us? Or whatever it is. They weren't going to take it seriously. And I thought, well, if I'm dead, I hope they take it seriously. Then that night I came out and my Lexus was brand new and the tires have been slashed. I had to put cameras all over the front of my house, And I figured, okay, I think they're sending me some messages. Maybe, stop writing or whatever the case was. Didn't stop me.
There were 3 people who I felt could be responsible for Jim's death. One that I think is going to surprise you, but let's start with the obvious. Rick had a few motives. First was revenge. His club had been shut down and he was sent to prison, and Jim played a big part in that. This was a man who allegedly beat a customer with a baseball bat so badly that later they died from those injuries. Surely what this customer had done wasn't nearly as impactful as what Jim had done to Rick. But I think there's another motive. You see, Rick still owned the building and the club, but was being forced to sell it. The money was to be used to pay off his fines and judgments. If the club didn't sell soon and for enough money, the feds were going to start seizing his personal assets. It's not a stretch to believe Rick thought the club would sell sooner and for more money with Jim gone. The new buyer would have access to expand the club and not have to worry about a guy next door taking pictures of all the activities going on. And the last motive was the lawsuit that I had mentioned earlier in the video. You see, Jim actually hadn't won that harassment lawsuit yet. Because Rick was tied up with the FBI charges, the judge knew he wouldn't be able to deal with the harassment lawsuit until those were finished up. But the judge looked at the suit and decided there was enough in Jim's favor to order Rick to put $1 million in escrow. So when the time came, and if Jim were to win, the money would be available to pay him. With Jim dead, that lawsuit died, and Rick was able to get his money out of escrow.
Rick gets out of prison, goes in house arrest, the next day my dad's dead.
Yeah.
So I believe someone could kill someone for less than $1 million.
Yeah. One last thing to note in this section about Rick and the Crazy Horse 2, I don't know if you caught it, but I mentioned way earlier that Kirk Henry, the man who had become a paraplegic after an altercation with the Crazy Horse 2 staff, was found with a $1 bill in his pocket, and so was Jim. This one might surprise you, but I considered the idea that either Jim died of a simple accidental overdose or he may have taken his own life. It seems pretty solid that cocaine in his system caused cardiac arrest. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where someone is murdered this way. The idea of someone forcing him to snort cocaine in that room and there being no sign of a struggle or anything just seems unlikely. First, let's consider accidental overdose. According to Steve, Jim's last day alive was a wild one. Can you tell me a little bit about Jim's history with drugs?
When I first met him, of course, everybody in town knew that he was into partying to the point of going the wrong way down the freeway once.
Wow.
So, and I explained to him when I first met him, I said, I've got an airline license. I worked for the FAA. I've got a few reasons I can't be around you if you're a druggie. I said, and you and I we're going to be really good friends. I want you to fly with me. There's things that, we're going to do. But if you're a druggie, I'm going to have to give up on you. I said, and I've been around druggies. I know what to look for. I said, and if you're doing drugs, I'm out. He says, I will go cold turkey for you. And he did. For 9 years. I could be with him. I could look at him. I knew he's straight. And even his kids said that he was straight. And I think it was because of me, and I was always very proud of that. And so with the last day of his life, he wasn't. He had fallen off the wagon. It was obvious to me, John Smith at the RJ, and Joshua Longobardi at the Weekly Magazine, that the phone calls we all three got were from outer space.
What do you think caused him to fall off the wagon that day?
It was the happiest day of his life, and he couldn't control himself. See, the week of his death, his attorney and his accountant and I was his business consultant, unofficially, helped him to buy another property right behind his. He bought 3 acres, used to be Las Vegas RV sales. So beautiful property. That was the first thing that happened. That was 3 weeks before. Second thing that happens, NBC is going to do a series similar to Gas Monkey Garage. The same producers were coming, and they decided Buffalo Jim's Garage is going to be biggest thing, and they film the first 3 series. Yeah. He's going to run for mayor, and he's building these wild cars. And well, anyway, now he's a TV star about to become. Yeah. And then the third thing that happened, this is the day I think this triggered him. He had been waiting maybe for a year for this motorcycle. He ordered I call it a chrome metal sculpture for about $45,000-$50,000 from custom bike builder Jesse James, West Coast Choppers in Long Beach. Yeah. And it came the day he died. No way. They trucked it up here. He wasn't expecting it. He got on that thing and he was in heaven. So he went and got high.
All of these things seem to be coming together for him on that day, and he...
The TV show, moving to a beautiful location, and the motorcycle. It was just overwhelming. Yeah. So he got high.
Yeah. Hearing all of this, I considered that it may have just been an accidental overdose. But there was one piece of the puzzle that just did not fit in. The warning letter that Jim got that morning. I'm actually a firm believer that coincidences happen all the time, and that oftentimes people read way too much into them. But this one is just too much. To die the same day you receive a threat letter, this is what led me to consider that Jim took his own life. Maybe Jim sent that letter to himself. We know Jim was a showman and a wrestler. He went to Alcatraz and took pictures of Al Capone's cell, sending them to Rick with the line, "Greetings from your next residence." He challenged Rick to a wrestling match, saying if Rick won, he would put down his business. He even planned to run for mayor, knowing he couldn't win, but using it as a publicity stunt for the new show he was about to do with NBC. Could Jim have planned to end his life that day and figured he might as well make it look like the enemy did the job? Maybe that's why it happened the day after Rick was released from house arrest. Maybe that's why he got the threat letter that morning, and maybe that's why he was doing coke all day. He knew it was his last, and he was going to live it to the fullest. The more I learned about this story, the more I thought it was possible, but then I found something that would turn this whole idea upside down, something that no one else had discovered yet. The warning letter sent to Jim the day he died, and the threat letter sent to Steve weeks after Jim died, are from the same person. I was looking at these letters side by side and kept finding similarities. Let's start with the obvious and work our way to the less noticeable. First, both are written in all caps. Not a big deal, but it's something. Next, the font of the warning letter and the second font in Steve's threat letter are the same. Okay, that's interesting. Next, both letters at some point use the wrong your, spelled Y-O-U-R instead of Y-O-U''RE. None of these things on their own are much evidence, but I think they do add up. The last similarity is a harder to notice detail. It's easier to spot in Jim's warning letter, so let's start there. Look at this spot here. You can see its faint letters. These are upside down and match these letters up here. You can see it better when I put them right next to each other. It looks like a printer was printing with a lot of ink, and the ink hadn't dried yet when the sender folded the paper up. So when they did this, the ink that was still wet up here imprinted itself down here. The threat letter to Steve has the same thing. It's less noticeable, but you can make out some letters here that make out the caused in the line above. And it can be seen even more clearly when I adjust the levels of the image. With this revelation, there's a few things that, when thought about together, essentially make it wildly unlikely Jim's death was a suicide or accidental overdose. Here's what I mean. I find it incredibly unlikely that the very same day that Jim receives a letter saying he's in danger, he dies, and his death is completely unrelated to that letter. Like I said earlier, it's just too much of a coincidence. This letter has to have something to do with his death, and that's what led me to believe it's possible that Jim fabricated this letter himself. But if this letter was sent by the same person who sent this threat letter to Steve, it couldn't have been Jim who sent either of these letters, as Jim was dead when this letter was sent to Steve. I do want to note that I don't know 100% for sure that this text duplication thing is wet ink folded over on itself. Maybe it's a broken scanner that does this, and both of these letters were scanned in with the same scanner, and the text duplication thing that we're seeing doesn't exist on the originals. But with the other similarities, I still believe that they were likely sent by the same person. I wanted to see what Steve thought about all of this. And I'm not quite sure what to make of this. So I wanted to get your opinion on it. Let me... So looking at these letters here.
Yeah.
So we have the warning letter, and you know who this was from.
Yes.
But then this one from Rick Rizzolo and family. This is the threat letter that was sent to you the year next.
Yeah.
I have reason to believe that the same person actually sent these.
I don't think so.
So here's, and I could be wrong, right? Like this is just some of the things that I found. And some of the similarities almost mean nothing, and some I think could mean something.
Yeah.
So both of them, they're all caps.
Yes.
Again, that's not a big connection, right? I did notice that this font right here for these two lines is the exact same font as this.
Oh my, okay, yeah, that's interesting.
And I was able to overlap them, you know, an E on an E and all that kind of stuff. So it's the exact same font here.
I see.
In both places, they use your the wrong way. So like,
oh my goodness,
your here should be YOU''RE.
Yes,
and there's same here. Make sure you're not being followed.
You know something, I've never seen these compared, and so this is news to me, and I'm a little shocked.
Yeah. And then the biggest thing that I found, so this one right here, looks like the ink was still wet when they folded it, and you can actually see right here, like this is the at right here. If you were to flip these words backwards and upside down, like this had been folded over, this says taking place at. Like you can read it pretty clearly, right? So been taking place at, just like this says been taking place at, like it was folded over and printed.
I see what you're saying.
This has that exact same type of thing going on over here.
Okay.
So with this upper letter, if you fold this down here, right here, if you look really closely, it's hard to see, but you can see the upside down U and the A from caused right here.
Oh my.
And so kind of taking all those things into account, it seems, no pun intended, but if I had to put money on it, I would be putting my money on they were
same
from the
person.
same person.
I can't imagine why this person would have made that threat. I'm puzzled. I have no idea.
So this is something that you hadn't seen before?
No, I've never thought about it, never seen it before, and I'm puzzled.
Do you still do you still have a connection with this person? Are you still in contact with them?
No.
What are your initial just like thoughts and feelings after seeing this?
He may have been trying to set me up here. This one, I think he's being honest, but this one may have been to try to get my attention. To tell me who did it. I'm conjuring this up as we go. My conspiracy theory mind just went on. And I'm thinking maybe this is his way of tricking me into knowing what's about to happen or what just happened, and that was telling the truth. And this is telling me, you better look in this direction. That's my reporter and investigative journalist mind.
Yeah. Why don't you think he would just kind of do the same thing here and say, hey, Mr. Miller, meetings have been taking place, kind of a similar thing. Why do you think he'd frame it from Rick Rizzolo and family?
Because, Rick Rizzolo and family wouldn't have put their name on it.
Yeah. That's another thing
that's
led me to believe it probably
that,
wasn't from Rick, right?
That was the first thing I thought was, no, nobody's that stupid. Then I started thinking maybe there is somebody in the family that is, which I kind of confirmed. But that was real stupid. There's one in there that's really stupid.
Oh, God.
There's somebody in there that really is.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought, well, yeah, that probably is.
It could be. Yeah.
Probably,
It's possible, yeah.
The father almost ran over Buffalo, but this is another one. He had a couple of geniuses in the family. But now I'm going to use my investigative journalist theory, and I'm going to say, they're probably by the same person. This one was the day of his death. This one's a few days afterwards, and he's trying to tell me who did it. Same person.
Yeah.
But funny as it may seem, when we confirmed this as to who the author was, they never admitted this.
Gotcha. And did you ever have conversations with this person?
No.
Okay.
No. I never did.
Yeah. We're going to talk about what this could all mean in a moment, but before we do, I want to talk a bit about Lisa. Lisa was the last known person with Jim, so I think she needs to be considered. Here's a few things that make me a little suspicious of her. I remember initially thinking it's unlikely that Lisa had something to do with it because the police report says Jim called her. If someone was planning to kill Jim and wanting to use Lisa to get it done, you would think it would be Lisa that would reach out to Jim, not the other way around. But when I went and read through Lisa's interview, I found that Lisa actually did call Jim first. The line about Jim calling Lisa in the summary of the interview is just plain wrong. In the interview, Lisa explains that she was at a bar with a guy that she had worked with. He had just had his car towed and didn't have enough money to get it out, but did have a motorcycle that he was trying to sell so that he could get his car back. Lisa said she had a friend who loved motorcycles, and she called up Jim so they could talk. After Jim and the man spoke, Lisa got on the phone with Jim. She claims that Jim asked her if she wanted to hang out, and she said yes. Next, in her interview, she claims that she didn't take anything before she left, but a lot of people said that Jim always had a lot of cash on him. Where was Jim's money?
He was a guy walk around with $5,000, $10,000 in cash. Yep. So that's Buffalo, and it was so much fun to see with the big old bulging pockets of cash,
Yeah, my dad was a cash man my whole life. He always had a wad of cash with him, thousands of dollars. And by the way, that dollar bill had been put into the wallet, which is odd because my dad didn't put cash in the sleeve of the wallet. He always had a clump of cash in his pocket. He only used the wallet for his credit cards and his ID.
Another thing, according to Lisa's story, Jim was doing a lot of cocaine, but no bag of cocaine or container that would have held the cocaine was ever found. Did Lisa take that too when she left? She never mentions that, and it would seem like an odd move to take the cocaine if her story is true and she left because Jim was convulsing and she got scared. Is there more to her story? Was someone else there beside Lisa? Steve thinks that she might have been given some cocaine to give to Jim when they met up that was more pure or powerful than what Jim was used to taking.
And I got a feeling that she was the one who gave it to him. I don't think he bought it from some street vendor, and I think that he OD'd. I think she knew what happened. Lou Phillips, the police detective, I think sensed it, that there was more to the story. But she did volunteer to come in, so I don't think they were going to charge her.
Yeah. Do you think that the cocaine that she had was given to her for the purpose of killing Jim?
Yes.
Do you think she knew that at the time?
No.
Okay, now that we know more about Lisa, let's get back to the letters. How could they tie into everything? Well, honestly, there's a lot of possibilities here, and we have to do some serious speculation to consider them. Some of these I think are more likely and some less, but if they crossed my mind, I wanted to mention them. Here they are in no particular order. 1. The warning letters were sent to Jim as a plan by Steve and Jim to create more buzz around the story. After Jim's death, Steve continued with the fake letter operation and sent some to himself. When thinking about this more, this theory would require a lot of forethought from Steve. He's a writer and knew how to spell your correctly, and did in every instance I saw in the many articles of his that I read. So it would have had to have been intentionally done here to match the incorrect spelling of your in the previous letters. 2. These letters are from a random, kind of crazy person who does not really have much to do with anything other than following the story closely and wanting to insert himself in it. Jim did not know this and thought they were credible. The stress of receiving one of these letters the day after Rick was freed caused him to turn to drugs, and the overdose was accidental that night. 3. These letters really are from a man on the inside of Rick's circle who was warning Jim without the Rizzolos knowing about it. After Jim's death, he was asked by the Rizzolos to send a threat letter to Steve, and he did. 4. These letters are from the FBI. Okay, I know it sounds crazy, and it probably is, but here's what led me to consider it. We know the FBI was using Steve and the columns that he was writing. They were feeding him info that they wanted out in the public. Maybe this was another way to feed him info or get him and Jim riled up and talking negatively about the Crazy Horse 2. In one of the letters, it literally starts with, "It's important for you to pass this on to Steve Miller." I don't know what happened to Buffalo Jim, but I don't believe a thorough enough investigation was done. Just look at the car situation, for example. If some mystery person took it from the scene and returned it the next day, then the police should look into that, and they never did. If it was never actually missing and was there the whole time, then the police not finding a classic Rolls Royce in a Motel 6 parking lot shows either incompetence or an unintentional, or worse, intentional, lack of effort. And there were a few more examples of this.
So I made a strong request to get my dad's hair sample done. Because I noticed a trend here. They kept asking about the drugs. Does your dad take drugs? I called the detective, Mark Harding, and said, hey, can you please take a hair sample? And he goes, what do we need that for? And I said, I want to show that my dad wasn't a long-term drug user. And I believe that will show that. And he goes, yeah, you're right. That would show that. So we're gonna go to the Palm Mortuary and we're gonna get a hair sample. The next day I followed up with him to see if they were still going to get the hair sample, and he said yes, they were going to get the hair sample. They hadn't gotten it yet. Yeah. Well, fast forward a couple more days, we bury my dad, and I follow up about the hair sample, and they never took the hair sample. I would bet money that my dad hadn't taken cocaine in 5 years. Yeah. I would bet money on that. At least 5 years. Yeah. He was clean. And the hair sample would have proven that.
Jennifer has reached out to the Las Vegas police relatively recently.
And again, they said to me that unless something comes forward and they have a reason to reopen the case, they're currently not reopening the case, and that's where it stands.
You know, thinking about the police potentially being on the take with Rick, or, you know, being influenced by Rick's contributions in that time, it makes you wonder, like, there should be some avenue for the person in charge now to go back and reconsider not just Buffalo Jim's cases, but I'm sure there's other cases that should be reconsidered because of that time of influence, you know? And I don't think anything was proven with Metro Police, but it was with so many other people in charge that it's not a stretch to believe.
No, and this is probably why the FBI agent had said to me, if this case opens, it'll open a can of worms. That's probably what he means. Yeah. He's referencing, because why else would he say that? Yeah. He knows there's something here.
You just heard Jennifer mention the FBI. She has recently had a few meetings with them about her father's case.
So I met with an agent out in Washington, D.C., and that agent looked through my case file, and he was like, something suspicious here. And then he took a couple weeks to go through all of my materials. I have a large binder of materials, and then had asked me if he can see the photos from the crime scene. He personally came to my house and looked at all the photos from the crime scene and was like, yeah, I'm gonna connect you with someone in Vegas because you definitely need to sit down with the agents there. And I met with them, and I mean, the main agent I would talk to often would tell me that, yeah, there's something here, there's something suspicious here. Unfortunately though, because your dad wasn't found on federal grounds, we have no jurisdiction to open a case. It would need to be local law enforcement. It would need to be Metro initiating the reopening of the case, and we would support them. Now, we are opening a case file here at the Bureau in Vegas, so there is an open case right now, but their hands are tied until Metro stands up and acknowledges they need to open up a case. That's currently where I'm at, And again, going back, the FBI agent had said to me, if this case opens specifically my father's case, it would open a can of worms. Let's open that. That's where it stands currently. We need Metro to open a case.
Jim's death was a huge loss for his friends, for his daughters, but even for the people who now won't get the chance to know him.
He just was a big kid at heart and wanted to make it fun for his family.
Yeah.
And I miss those days. He has so many grandkids now. I mean, imagine what he would be doing right now with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim is no longer here, but the ripples of his impact are still felt. What do you think your father's legacy is? How do you think people will remember your father?
I think he's remembered by, he won Las Vegas's most colorful character. I think in Las Vegas he's known as that. But a man that never went down without a fight, and he didn't want intentional fights, but he stood his ground and held his own and was not going to back down to any bullies.
Yeah.
I just wish I had more with him now. Obviously, we all wish we can turn back the time.
Yeah.
He was so much fun, and I only knew him for 9 years. I wish I would have known him for all my whole life. And, he's just one of those people that you see in your life, you just wish they could just stay. That's all. I miss him.
He taught me to never give up. After my dad passed away, I really had to decide, is this something I'm going to take on or not? In 1998, my dad and I were up at Mount Charleston having hot chocolate together, and he had said to me, if anything were to happen, would you stand up? And I said, yeah, but what does that mean? And I remember him saying, I was just asking. In my initial thought process at that time, I thought he meant old age. Would I be there for him? Of course I would. And then after he passed away, I started replaying him asking me that again in my head. And I thought maybe that's what he meant. Would I stand up for him? I replay that, will you stand up for me, often in my head, even today, 16 years later. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, I'll stand up for you. I'm still here, and I'm still speaking about it.
I want to give a big thank you to Jeff and Michaela at the Mob Museum in Vegas. It's a fascinating place full of really cool history. If you're in Vegas, it's a must visit. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Lastly, YouTube thinks you'll like this video. I'll see you there.